Okay, so the recording has started. We'll have this available on our website later if you want to review it. This is one in a series of webinars run by our education team. We run them about every 2 weeks. You can see the schedule on our website and a list of upcoming topics and presenters. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Todd Raydell. I started as one of our technical account managers about 3 years ago, so I've been in the field working with customers. A lot of you may know me. I now run a team called Customer Advocacy here at AppDynamics. So today's topic is Advanced Business Transaction Configuration. And you're going to see me use the phrase BT a lot in the presentation. So your first advanced lesson is that BT stands for Business Transaction, in case you were wondering. So a couple of quick topics. If you've never attended one of our webinars before, we'd like to do a little bit of presentation, a little bit of live demo if we can, and then we leave plenty of room at the end for what we call office hours, which is a chance for you guys to ask questions about the week's topic and you know, connect with us in an open forum. So quick review, first of all, why is it important to configure BTs? I'm going to give you some examples of creating custom BT rules, creating exclude rules, sort of the advanced configuration stuff. And then I'm going to show you 2 new features that have been added this year. One is called Business Transaction Lockdown that was added in 4.0, and the second one is called the BT Discovery Tool, which was added in 4.1. And then we will open up the floor for questions. So right now, everybody is muted. If you have a question, you can type it into the chat window in the GoToWebinar control panel, and that'll raise a virtual hand. Caitlin here from the education team will let me know if there's any questions, and I'll try and stop and answer them. Later, when we get to office hours, we'll unmute and let everybody ask. Okay, right now, if you have a question, just use the question panel. Okay. So quick review, and again, if any of you have ever had me out to your site to talk about AppDynamics, this is probably going to sound like familiar information, but for those of you who haven't, why is it important to configure business transactions, right? Out of the box, AppDynamics tries to detect business transactions. It gives you a nice list, so why should I bother, you know, tweaking that or configuring it? Couple of reasons. First of all, trying to automatically guess your business transactions works in some cases, not in others. Everybody's website is different, everybody's business is different, their applications are different. So we take a best guess, but you know your applications way better than we do, and it's always a good idea to set up your list of business transactions so that they really reflect your business. If you create your custom BTs, it's going to be easier to find problems when they occur. I'll show you some examples of that. Probably easier than if you stick with the default rules. The other reasons are the more specific you get with your BTs, the more you dial them in, the more accurate the metrics are going to be, the more accurate our baselines are going to be, the easier it's going to be to interpret things like snapshots and health rules, okay, because all of those things happen on a per BT basis. So let me give you an example. If you've ever taken one of our training classes, this will probably look familiar. This is our training application called Movie Stream, or as I sometimes say, Movies Dream, so that people remember to type a Z in the URL. But out of the box, this is what some of the BTs look like, and you can see some of them, like login, are pretty specific. That's a good BT in and of itself. Okay, but there are some others, like the first one you see, customer. Really hard to tell what that means and what an average response time of 42 milliseconds means for a customer. There could be 100 different pages and 100 different transactions under customer. I don't see rent a movie. I don't see pay for a movie. There's a lot of things missing from this list. If they're all hidden under that Movie Stream UI customer, then they're all being sort of lumped into one bucket together. The numbers are being averaged together. So if there's a problem with renting a movie, How do I know that from looking at this screen, right? So this is a case where you would want to customize the BTs and pull out rent a movie or pull out movie search so that these become their own BTs and they're not just getting thrown together with 99 other things under that bucket that says customer, okay? So when you start with the product, a lot of people start with some of the simple BT customization. So if you're in the BT list and you right click, you get all these options, and you can rename, you can delete, you can exclude, and I'll talk about the difference between those two in a minute. You can group BTs together, and then there's an option if you go into configuration to change the default naming rules. And what that is for URL-based BTs, how much of the URL we're going to use as the BT name. The default out of the box is 2 segments, which is why, if I go back a slide for a minute, you see all of the BTs currently have 2 segments in them: Movie Stream UI Customer, Movie Stream UI Login, 2 segments. So one of the easiest customizations that people do is to go in and change the number of segments based on their site structure. Give me 3 or 4 segments, or just use the whole URI. That's a simple customization. There's a lot more that we can do, and I'm gonna show you some examples. So I mentioned deleting and excluding. Sometimes people ask me what the difference is. Deleting a BT removes it from the list, deletes all of the history, snapshots, metrics, everything associated with that BT. But if a user comes back to that page, that BT will be detected again as a new BT. So in that sense, delete is kind of temporary. Excluding a transaction doesn't delete the history, but it does permanently remove it from the list. So you'll never see that BT again. So one of the things a lot of people do is they go through their BT list and they start excluding a whole bunch of junk one after the other. And that's fine as a beginning, but I'm going to show you some ways using rules, custom rules, to specify BTs, to exclude BTs. So if there are parts of your site that you don't need to track in AppDynamics, they're not as important as things like rent a movie or pay by credit card, then you can remove them actually with a rule-based system rather than having to go through and right-click and delete. Okay, so some examples of what's possible with advanced customization. You can create custom rules, like I said, for search or rent a movie, things like that. You can take a BT that's been detected as a single BT and maybe split it out, obviously by the URL, but you can also do it by page parameters or payload. So I'll show you a good example of that in a minute with a search form. And then finally, using exclude rules, like I said, to focus on things that are more important and eliminate the things that are less important. Finally, this is one of my famous quotes. I even attribute it to myself up there, but I tell people this at every session that I do on site. Going back to the question of, why should I bother to do this, right? Here it is. The more effort you put into configuring BTs, the more AppDynamics is going to help you. The easier it's going to be to find the problems, the easier it's going to be to find solutions. I realize no one wants to do a lot of manual configuration work. Think of it like doing the yard work. If you want to have a yard you can be proud of, sometimes you have to go out and trim the hedges a bit, right? It's occasional maintenance. Hopefully it's not too demanding, and I'll show you some tricks. Okay, so on to creating some custom BT rules. I'm going to show you a couple of slides with examples, and then I'm actually going to flip into a demonstration and show you how to do it. Some example use cases, right? Excluding pages that match a certain pattern. A lot of times, a lot of customers have a public website, and then they have an administration site where they can control the content. Think of an e-commerce site where you can change a product description, update a price, upload a picture, things like that. Maybe you want to focus on the e-commerce side and not worry about the admin pages. So how do I exclude all pages that start with admin, right, so that they don't become BTs? Another example, naming BTs based on part of the payload. get parameters, post parameters, cookies, headers, even payloads. If you have a web service or a REST service or something like that, can I create lots of different BTs based on the type of request that's coming in or the payload of the request? Even based on names of classes and methods that get called during the BT. Okay, so there's lots of options based on what's included on the page or what code gets hit or the URL. It's pretty much limited only by your imagination. Okay, and this is where customers need to synthesize their knowledge of AppDynamics with their knowledge of their own applications, right? You need to know how your app works in order to do some of this to create BTs, but I'm going to show you some examples using our Movie Stream site. So an example with Movie Stream, right? This is your average online streaming service. So you can search for a movie. You can pay to rent the movie with a credit card, and then it'll stream to your browser. So obviously there's a search form to search for a movie, and you can search by title or by category, by year it was released, whatever. If it was a more advanced example, you could probably search by the actor name or number of Oscars that it won, whatever. But each one of those searches probably runs through a different path in the code, right? Searching by movie title might look at one database table. Searching by category might look at a different table. They have different response times. They take different paths through the code. So it might be nice to see them as separate BTs. So how do we do that? So I'm going to show you an example. So here I have a controller that's running our Movie Stream application. You can see this list of BTs is the same as what I showed you in that earlier screenshot. So this is out of the box default config. And again, we don't see things like search or rent here. Okay. So my first step might be to create a custom rule so that I can find the search page. And if I look at the Movie Stream site, here's the search page, and you notice it goes Movie Stream UI, movie, search.htm. So I want to create a BT, and anytime somebody hits search.htm, I want that to be identified as a different BT called search. Okay, you notice right now anything that starts with Movie Stream movie is all getting thrown into this bucket together. And this goes back to the first thing that I said, right? If the BTs aren't specific enough, you're going to find lots of stuff lumped together in a single business transaction. So here you can see snapshots of our search page are being kind of lumped together under movie. So how do I make this its own BT? So from the BT list, I can go to configure. Okay, and we're on the transaction detection page. Now in this case, I can select the UI tier because that's where these pages exist. And you see up at the top are all the default naming rules. Most of you have probably been in here before. Here's the default naming that I talked about earlier, where we're using the first two segments of the URL. Okay. Down at the bottom, where a lot of people never go, but here are the custom rules. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to create a custom rule to pull out that search page. So I start by adding a custom rule. In this case, since we're talking about Java, and it's a page or a JSP or a servlet, we want to choose servlet. There we go. Okay, and then you see we have all kinds of options for identifying match rules for this traffic. So I'm going to start by giving my BT a name. I'm going to call it search. And then you have to give it a priority. And priority is basically any positive integer. The reason we have that is so that if you have multiple custom match rules, you can have you can make sure that the order that they're evaluated in is predictable. Okay, so you can have more specific rules with higher priorities, and you can have general rules with lower priorities, and the agent will evaluate them in priority order from highest to lowest. So I usually, when I create rules, I usually do like 10, 20, 30. Okay, things like that. That way, later on, if I have to go back and adjust and add an additional rule, I've got room in the middle. I can create a 15 Okay, if I just did 1, 2, 3, 4 as my priority, and then I realized I wanted another rule in the middle, I'd have to renumber them all. It's kind of a pain. So I do 10, 20, 30. Okay, and we know the search page ends with search.htm. I'll change this to ends with. Okay, and that's it. This instruction will get sent to the agents, and in a couple of minutes, assuming we have load on the application, we should see a new BT pop up in the BT list called search. And that's going to contain only the search transactions. Okay, so we've now separated them out from this /movie stream /movie. Okay. Now maybe we want to take it a step further. Like I said, the search page, you can search different ways, right? I can come here and search for category and say, show me all the comedies, or I can get logged out, you know, whatever. Let's try this again. There we go. So if I search for comedies, I get one list. If I can search for part of a title, I'm going to get a different list. Okay, maybe those are different database tables. They take different amounts of time. Sometimes searching by name takes a lot longer than just looking up a category. So I want to create separate BTs for these so that I can monitor the performance individually and let me know if there's a problem with my search engine, right? So what I'm going to do is create some BT rules that say if the title field is filled in, then make a different BT called search by title. If the category is selected, then make a BT called search by category. And the way we do that is using those priority rules, okay? So we already have a rule here with priority 10 for search. What I'm going to do is clone that rule and create a new one called search by movie title. I'll put it in the UI tier. So you see, because I copied the existing rule, it already has this condition in here. And I'm going to add another condition that says if the parameter value title is not empty, then we're going to call this search by title. Oop, and I broke my own rule. I forgot to change the priority, so I'm going to go back and do that. Now I'll take this and clone it and make another one and call it search by category. I'll put that in the same tier. And I'll change this one. So instead of looking at the title parameter, I'll look at the category parameter. Now I've got two rules with a priority 20 and one with a priority 10. So the way this is going to work, when a request comes in to the JVM, it's going to look at the URL, and if it matches either one of these rules first, it's going to use this name for the BT. Otherwise, it'll drop down and look at the next priority rule, which is just the search. It'll use that. If it doesn't match that, then it'll use the default rules up here. Okay, so if I come back to my BT list now, it's going to take a minute or two, but you notice search has already appeared. Okay, we now have a new BT called search. If we give it another 2 or 3 minutes, you're going to see more BTs called search by name, or search by title, search by category. Let me see if I can help that along a little bit. I'll run a couple of searches here real quick. This brings up an important point. When you're playing with BT rules, you need to have some load on the application, okay? Because there has to be traffic coming in order for the agent to apply these rules and actually create the BTs. If the app is just sitting there, there's no traffic coming in, then there's nothing for the agent to register. All right. We have load on this application, but as it turns out, it doesn't really hit the search page. So I'm going to provide a little bit of load. And now if I come back here, wait a minute or two, we'll see the new BTs turn up. Okay. So like I said, matching part of the URL, or in this case, matching actual values entered on the page, is one way to customize BTs. Another thing you might want to do is exclude a bunch of BTs. So I mentioned this admin site, and this is really back-end stuff. It's not customer-facing. If it goes down, it's going to inconvenience a few people in the company, but I'm not going to have customers calling and screaming at me. I'm not losing money as a company. They're not going to call me and wake me up at 2 in the morning because the admin site is down, right? They really care about buying, renting, and streaming movies. So maybe I want to just eliminate these from the BT list so that I can focus on what's important up here, right? One way to do this would be to go through each one and right-click and say exclude, okay? But notice there's something in common. All of these BTs start with movie stream admin, right? So how can I exclude all of the movie stream admin pages in one shot? So let me show you that. I can come back to the BT configuration, and right next to the custom rules, there's an option to add an exclude rule. So again, this would be like a servlet type, and I can say very similar match conditions. I can say if the URI contains or starts with movie stream admin, then I just want to exclude it. I don't want it in my BT list. I don't want to see it. Okay. And again, you give this a couple of minutes for the agent to receive the instructions and for it to start to take effect. And what you're going to see is these BTs won't disappear immediately. They don't get deleted, but the traffic to them will start to drop off. The number of calls will drop to 0, and then you can go through and actually delete them. Okay. So if we waited a minute or two, we would see this graph start to trend down towards 0, kind of following my mouse, because we're no longer detecting those BTs. They've been excluded. I see my search by category and search by title haven't shown up yet, but it can take a few minutes sometimes, as you guys know. All right, so that is a couple of quick examples of creating some custom rules. One other thing I wanted to point out, when you're doing this yourself, you're going to find that it's kind of a interactive process, or maybe trial and error is a better description. You create some rules, you try it out, you see what the results are. Maybe you have to go back and delete a few BTs, create some more rules, give it a few minutes, and so on. You know, it's kind of an iterative process. Okay. Now, in the next section, I'm going to show you a new way to do this that we added in 4.0 that makes this a little easier. But one thing to keep in mind when you're creating these rules is the way that they are interpreted and the priority. So when traffic comes into your application, the way that it works is the agent will look at these custom rules first and try to apply those. Okay. If none of them match, it'll look through the exclude rules to see if there's anything in there that matches. If none of those rules match, then it's going to come up here and use the default entry point rules up at the top. Okay. A lot of times people create a rule and it doesn't seem to be working, or it doesn't seem to be applying to traffic. And usually that's because the rules are not being evaluated in the order that you think they are. If you have, for example, we created an exclude rule for the admin pages. If I went over here and created a match rule that also matched the admin pages, then they're never going to get excluded, because remember, these rules get evaluated first. So a lot of times if an exclude rule doesn't work, it's probably because there's another custom match rule that's matching first, and the agent stops at that point. So I see we have a couple of questions from Daniel. Caitlin, can you click on this? Are there a correlation of BTs to performance impacts to controller? Okay. So that is a good question, and an associated question is there a limit of the number of BTs that are allowed? So the answer to that question is yes, there is a limit. And the reason for that answers your first question. It's the performance impact. So by default, there are two limits that apply here. Each agent will track, normally will track 50 business transactions, okay? And the controller has a limit of 200 business transactions per application. If you exceed either of those limits, you're going to see a new entry show up here in this list that says all other traffic and the tier name. So it would say all other traffic MZUI, okay? And that's a sign that you've breached one of those limits, okay? Another way to tell if you reach the controller limit is if you look up here, it'll say showing 14 of 200 BTs. Once you hit that 200, then you know you've hit the limit. Both of those limits can be adjusted. I don't recommend that you do it by yourself unless you consult with us first, because there is a performance impact. Every BT that's being tracked by the agent is going to require a little bit of memory to track the metrics and take snapshots and things like that, okay? If you increase the limit of 200 on the controller side, then there's more data coming into the controller. There's more data that needs to be aggregated and baselined and measured and things like that. So all of this does have an impact. Now, generally, most customers don't have a problem increasing the limit. I've seen customers go as high as 800, 1,000, I think in one case 1,500 BTs. But we don't recommend it for one simple reason, and it's not performance. No sane human being can track 1,500 different things in their head, right? That's what it comes down to. You really want to focus on what's important and critical to your business. Like I said a few minutes ago, I want to track the BTs that are critical to the business that's going to cause them to call me and wake me up and get me out of bed in the middle of the night if something goes down. That's the stuff everyone really cares about, okay? 1,500 BTs, I guarantee you there's stuff in there that you probably don't need to monitor. So a follow-up question, is that controlled by excluding BTs? Yeah, so you're way ahead of me, Daniel. So if you start to see an overflow, you start to see this all other traffic showing up. Here's an example here. You can see that. I have another controller up that's set up with an overflow, and it's got all other traffic. So when you see that, one good thing to do is to start excluding and reducing your BTs to get back under the limit. Again, to focus on what's really important, right? And again, in the next section, I'm going to show you a new feature that actually helps you contain the BT list and prevent these overflows. So let's go back to PowerPoint for a minute. So this is a new feature called Business Transaction Lockdown. It was added back with the 4.0 release. It does only apply to Java and .NET today. I think we're planning to add it to the PHP and Node and Python agents at a later date. Right now, it's only Java and .NET, and it actually requires both your controller and your agents to be at 4.0. So this is a feature that requires both of those to be upgraded. But what BT Lockdown does is it basically freezes your BT list. Once you get it to where you want, it'll stop new BTs from being registered, automatically registered, okay? So any new BTs that get detected, they'll get sent into that all other traffic bucket instead, just as if you had exceeded the BT limit. So it'll create the all other traffic, it'll put the new BTs in there. The difference is that you've got a button in all other traffic where you can actually cherry pick BTs out of that and promote them back to the BT list, okay? So it's a way of keeping the BT list clean and having some control over how new BTs get detected and added to your list. Now, before 4.0, the way that we used to advise customers on this was to create custom rules like you just saw, but we called them catch-all rules, okay? For example, to create a rule that matches any URL, you see this one at the bottom here, and that way any new traffic that came in, if it didn't match any of the other rules, would just go into this catch-all bucket rule. And that was also a way of keeping your BT list clean. The advantage here is that you could have multiple catch-all rules using that priority feature to have more or less specific catch-alls. So for example, we just created custom rules for the movie search. We could create a couple of catch-all rules, one to match anything that starts with /movie and another one to match anything else. And that would also keep your BT list clean. So there's two different ways of doing this. And there's advantages and disadvantages to both, and here I've broken them down for you. So once you turn on BT lockdown, then the question is, well, how do I know what I'm missing, right? There may have been new BTs that are being detected. Maybe we did a deployment yesterday. There's new pages on the site. How do I get those new pages into the system as BTs? With BT lockdown, you can go right to all other traffic. You can pick the ones that are new and promote them back to the BT list. With catch-all rules, you won't know unless unless the developer tells you, hey, we've got new pages, or maybe you could look at snapshots and see some new URLs coming in and say, oh, I need to go back and create another custom BT rule for these new URLs, right? So it's a little more work. In terms of visibility, same thing. It's much easier with the lockdown feature to see what's been excluded because you can go right to that view traffic details button and it gives you a list of all the BTs that have been excluded. Using the catch-all method, you kind of need to look at all the snapshots that are being gathered and look at the URLs in those snapshots to see what's being excluded. Again, it's possible. It's a couple extra clicks. It's a little more work. On the other hand, the catch-all rules are, as I just showed you, much more flexible. You can order things by priority, create kind of different tiers of catch-alls, whereas with the lockdown, it's all or nothing. The entire application is locked down or it's not. Either way, though, the end result is that you have a nice, clean list of BTs. Hopefully, you don't go over the BT limit. And the only real difference at the end is that with lockdown, you're going to get all other traffic. With the catch-all rules, you'll get your catch-all bucket or whatever you name that custom rule. Okay. Either way, it's being used to group all the extra stuff. All right. So let me show you how to do that. So going back to my MovieStream site, it's really easy. If I go to the BT configuration and I select the application, there's a checkbox right at the very top that says Enable Business Transaction Lockdown. And if you forget everything I said today, there's a little help button next to it that tells you what the checkbox does. Okay. So now I've turned that on. In a couple of minutes, once the agents get the new configuration, any new traffic that comes in, if it doesn't match one of these existing BTs, it will go into all other traffic instead of creating new BTs. So this list is now kind of frozen. So here's an example. If I take, naturally my screen just froze. Okay. Let me try and refresh the page. This is where I usually make jokes about Flash and Adobe, but bear with me for a second here. Okay. All right. So if I select a bunch of URLs, I could delete or exclude them. Now, like I said, normally when you delete BTs, they come back as soon as they receive traffic again. Now they're not going to because I'm in lockdown mode, right? So instead of creating new BTs for the MovieStream admin page, I'm going to get the all other traffic. Now, switching gears for a minute, if any of you have ever watched cooking shows, you know that you don't sit there and watch the food bake or cook until it's done, right? They always have another pan that's ready to go. So I've done the same thing in this webinar. I have another controller up where I already enabled lockdown so that we don't have to sit and wait for the agents to do this. Okay, so if you notice, my BT list is much smaller over here. I have just a couple of BTs, and then I have all other traffic, which is where most things are going now. If I go into all other traffic, there's a link on the side that says View Traffic Details. And this is where you get the list of all of the BTs that would have been registered if you hadn't enabled lockdown. Okay? And now, like I said, you can take these and cherry pick them and make BTs out of them. So I could take my search page and say, register that as the BT. It'll take it out of all other traffic, and when I come back to the BT list in a minute or two, you'll see the search page is now a BT. Okay, so this is a really nice way of keeping your BT list manageable and yet giving you the flexibility to create new BTs anytime that you want. You just have to remember to go in and check that all other traffic dashboard every once in a while. Okay, so moving on. Another new feature that was added, this time in 4.1, it was called the Business Transaction Discovery Tool. Right now this is Java only. Again, we're going to add it to the other agents in a future release, but this is a really helpful thing. It's kind of like a sandbox for testing out your custom rules to create new BTs. If you remember a minute ago, I said it's kind of an iterative process. You create some rules, you see if they work, you see what BTs you get, and then you go back and adjust, right? So that was kind of the old workflow. Create some BT rules, throw some load at it, look at what gets added to your BT list, maybe delete some, rename some, create more custom rules, and keep trying until you get the list the way that you want. With the BT Discovery tool, you actually have the option of having kind of a sandbox to play around in for a few minutes, and then as soon as you get the list the way that you want, you click apply, and it creates the custom rules for you. So that way you can experiment with creating custom rules without actually messing up your BT list in your application. So let me give you an example of how this works. And notice I come back to my controller, and now, because I enabled lockdown, I'm starting to get these all other traffic BTs, right? So let me come back in here for a minute, and I will turn off the lockdown. And if I go to the configuration screen, you see there's a new option called Discovery Tools. And again, this is new in 4.1. So this is where you find the BT Discovery tool. All right. And what this is kind of a real-time console to experiment with your BT rules. So the first thing you have to do is pick a node. Where do you want to play? Now in this case, because I want to play with kind of user-facing stuff, I'm selecting the web server. And if we give this a few seconds, what's going to appear here in the list is actually the BTs that would be discovered and registered outside of the sandbox. And then you can play around with different tools and create custom rules to kind of refine this further. So if we go back to the example of the search page from this morning, let me see in this other controller. I don't think I've done it there yet, so that might be a better choice. Yep, okay. So let me actually try it on this controller. Go into my Discovery Tools. Again, I pick my UI node. See if either, there we go, okay. So this one's starting to work. We'll let this one cook for a minute. So exciting waiting for something to happen on an empty screen, isn't it? All right. So just for purposes of hurrying this along, just so you guys understand, I'm going to go through the example again of creating rules for the search page, but this time I'm going to do it in the Discovery tool so that you see how it's different. So in my Discovery tool, here's the real-time traffic coming in on that node UI001. These are all the BTs that would be created if we exited Discovery mode. Okay, and you notice again our search page is getting lumped up under /movie. We can't really see the search page. Okay, so I can go in here and edit the discovery config, and you see it looks exactly like the standard BT discovery configuration that we saw earlier. The only difference is now it only applies in the sandbox. So I can go in and create the same kind of rules I created before and say if the URI ends with search.htm, I'm going to call that search. I give it a priority 10. Maybe I'll do search by title. And the parameter title is not empty. There we go. So these are the same rules we had earlier. Now I can go back to view the results. And you notice instead of waiting a couple of minutes now for the new BTs to be detected, right away it's telling me, oh yeah, if you apply those rules, it's going to create a new BT called search. It's right there at the top of the screen. Okay. Now let's say once I get the rules the way that I want, and I want to apply them to the actual BT list, I can actually just say apply config. And that's it, it's done. Okay. You also have the option, I didn't cover this earlier, but you have the option of creating BTs based on the name of a class and method that gets executed in the code instead of based on form parameters or HTTP parameters or things like that. So there's a class and method browser where you could say, show me all the code that implements a servlet interface. Okay, or show me all the stuff that implements Runnable or some other interface where you might want to create BTs from, and you can use the results to create POJO rules, which are just like the servlet rules, only they match class and method instead. Okay, but so I'll come back to my discovery config. So there I've got my search BT. Now I want to apply this and make it permanent. I can say apply the config, apply it to my UI tier, and then stop my discovery session. Okay. Now, if I come back to the BT list in a minute, I'm going to see my new search BT. So that's using the discovery tool as kind of a real-time sandbox to play with the BT rules and then applying them back to the BT list. That was really all I had in terms of presentation. We're going to open it up for Q&A in a minute. I also included some links for further reading, so later on, once we post the video and the slides online, you'll be able to use these links into our documentation to read more about it. Okay, why don't we open it up for questions? Can we unmute, or do we need to? Okay, we'll keep everybody muted so that we don't corrupt the audio. And if you have questions for our office hours open house, go ahead and type them into the question box in GoToMeeting. So we've already answered all three of those. We'll just go ahead and wait for more questions to appear. This is a good question. Can those BT configurations be exported out to other applications? The answer is yes. And off the top of my head, I can actually think of 3 or 4 different ways to do it. Let me demonstrate some of them. So one way to do it is I can come back to my application list, select my application movie stream, and under the Actions menu, I can export the entire application config. Okay, so that's going to include the BT rules, the BT list, but lots of other stuff too. The list of nodes and tiers, the list of BTs. This is the entire application config. Okay. The limitation to this is that you can only import this as a brand new application. One reason people want to import and export configuration is so that they can promote a configuration between environments. So maybe you do your BT config in dev or test, and then you want to export it and import it into QA, import it into production, and so promote it through the environments. This feature isn't going to work for that because you can't import an application over an existing application. You can only do it as a new one. So there's a couple of other ways to do this. There is a REST UI call that you can do from a command line and write a script where you can actually import and export these custom rules that we were creating, okay, from a script. And it'll, if you export it, you get some XML, and then you can do another REST call with a post to import it. Finally, there's a third option that I can think of. We have a tool that was developed by our support team that we've shared with a few customers. Some of our TAMs and consultants have used it on site with different customers, called a config exporter, and that lets you import and export different sections of the configuration, like the BT config, and move it between different controllers in different environments. So that's a third option. We'll probably have more of a REST API-based approach in the future. Again, it's all about making this more scriptable and repeatable for you guys, so that when you promote your code between environments, you should be able to promote the BT rules and the configuration along with it. Okay. Another question: do you have to use 4.0 on both the controller and agent to use BT lockdown? I am not 100% sure, but I'm probably 99% sure the answer is yes to that. So the BT lockdown and the BT discovery console were both new. One's 4.0, one's 4.1, and I believe they require support in the agent, so that you have to have your controller and your agent at 4.0 or 4.1 to make those features work. Any other questions? We'll keep the line open for a few more minutes and see if other people have questions, and if not, then we'll close it out. But this is your time. If you've got a question, go for it. Another question: are health rules impacted by custom BTs? So I hate to be coy, but the answer to that is it depends. It depends on what your health rule is. Lots of people create health rules that are based on particular BTs. Like, for example, I want to know if it takes more than 100 milliseconds to log in, or I want to know if the error rate on the search feature goes above a certain threshold. So those are based on those individual BTs, okay? Which means if you create new BTs using all these custom rules, that yes, you might want to go back and adjust your health rules. Now, the built-in health rules in AppDynamics that we give you out of the box are based on all business transactions. So those you don't need to adjust. As we create new BTs, if any of them violate these rules, they'll trigger a health rule violation. But once you create new custom BTs, you might also want some custom health rules around it, so that I could say, if the performance of a particular BT, right, like my search BT, changes from the default. So I can create a rule around average response time just for that one particular BT. Okay? Daniel, I hope that answers the question. Jack, we don't see the BT lockdown option in config, and you're on a 414 controller. Okay, well, Jack is one of our consultants, and he should already know how to do this. But just in case you forgot where it is, I'm going to show you again in the configuration. So I go to configure instrumentation, I go to transaction detection. Remember, you have to select the application at the top. The BT lockdown is an application level feature. If I select one of the tiers, I don't see that option there. But if I go up to movie stream, I see the BT lockdown. Any other questions? What is a good naming convention? Actually, if we weren't all on mute, I would turn that question around and ask you what's a good naming convention. I think some of it depends on you and your environment. Some customers use very URL-based naming conventions because it's what they're used to seeing. I actually would prefer and usually recommend that people use more sort of business-focused naming. So you notice I created a BT called search, and search by title and search by category. Remember, AppDynamics is a tool that you can share with your dev team, your ops team, and you know, even business analysts and VPs and things like that. They may not understand what /search.htm means, but everyone knows what search by title means. So, you know, I generally recommend that people use a name that's easy to understand. Now, there are some tricks that you can apply. For example, you could have several different levels of naming and separate them with dashes or periods or things like that, because then you can come in and search the list alphabetically, which naturally it's not going to do right now. I don't know why. Let me try it on this controller. Yeah, I don't know why the search isn't working for me. Oh, there with the sort. There we go. Okay, so if you name them in a way that you could sort them alphabetically, I've even I had a customer once a long time ago that had an e-commerce site with a multi-step checkout process. And if you've ever bought stuff online, I'm sure you've gone through the same thing. So you go to cart, and then you check out, and then you enter your shipping address, and on the next page you enter your credit card details, and then finally you get an order confirmation. And they wanted to see those pages in order in the BT list. So they actually named those BTs like checkout 01 cart, checkout 02 address, checkout 03 payment, checkout 04 submit. And that way when they sorted the list alphabetically, they could see all the steps in order. That's one option. There's lots of different ways that you could, you know, apply this. I think a lot of it depends on how your application works. And just one update earlier, I was giving Jack a hard time because I said he should know how to enable the BT lockdown. Turns out it was somebody sitting with Jack, so he's off the hook. Anyway, a couple of other questions that just came in. I would like to rename BT. It's something like /app/something.aspx, but I would like to, okay, I'd like to remove the segment from the middle. Okay. So this is another type of custom rule. I don't know that I have an example here. Yeah, maybe I do. So take a look with me at these URLs here in the middle. So we have movie stream UI /customer/rent/rates. And And you notice that one thing they have in common is this second segment is all customer. And the question is, how could I remove customer from the BT name without losing the first part of the URL and the last part of the URL? This is a pretty common thing to want to do. So let me give you an example of how to do that. So again, I go back to my configuration. We're going to create a custom rule. I'll give it a name. All these pages include /customer, so I'll call it customer pages. And I'll say any URL that contains /customer. So it'll match all of those cases. But then I want to split that transaction out. So right now, if I just click OK, what I'm going to get is one BT called customer pages that has everything in it that contains /customer. It's not exactly what I want. What I want to do is have the last part of the URL, but not the first part. Okay, so in this case, I want to split the transaction. Okay, earlier I showed you ways to split and match based on post parameters. This is a little different. We're doing it using the URI segments. So in this case, I want to use segments 1 and 3. Okay, because 1 and 3, if I come back to this for a minute, segment 1 is the movie stream UI. Customer is segment 2, and rent.htm is the segment 3. So with this custom rule, anything that matches customer, it'll take the movie stream UI and take the last part and ignore the customer in the middle, and that will be the name of the new BT. So actually, let me see. If we do it with the discovery tool, we might see it right away. Sylvan, I hope that answers your question. Hopefully we'll come back and try to see the results in a minute. So who else? Oh, we've got a bunch of questions. Okay. Go back up to. No, I'm sorry. Okay. So we have another question from Ashti. I have a few custom rules in place, and then I start discovery session. Would my custom rules still be active? I believe that when you start a discovery session, it does not apply any of your existing custom rules. But I have to admit this is a brand new feature in 4.1, and I'm not 100% sure of that. I'll try to get you an answer from our product people and ping you offline with the answer. Sylvan. The part I want to remove is a token, not a string, never the same. Okay, I misunderstood the question. Okay, so what Sylvan is asking is if you have a site with URLs that look like something like this, right, where the part in the middle is a token or an ID or a GUID that's going to change every time. Okay, and I don't have an example of this right now, but I've seen it over and over again with customers. And what will happen is you come into their BT list, and you'll see 100 different BTs that all start with /product and end with view, and in the middle there's all these different random numbers, right? Because there's one for each product. And that does two things. Number one, it fills up your BT list so you have an overflow. And second, it's a mess to look at. You want to know if there's a problem with the product view page, not with the view page for a particular movie or one particular product, right? It's all the same code. If there's a problem with one, there'll be a problem with all. So actually, for Sylvan, the answer to this is still the same thing. You create a custom rule, and I'll go back. Where is my custom rule? I guess I didn't save it. See, this is what happens. I open too many tabs, and now I'm confusing myself. Here it is. Okay. So if we split on segment 1 and 3, to go back to your example where there's a random token in the middle, it's still going to ignore this. Okay. So for this particular example, if we follow the custom rule that I've got, it's going to use the name of the rule, and then it's going to use token 1 and token 3, and that is exactly the name of the BT that you will end up with, Sylvan. Okay? Anybody else with a question? Will my BT look like product view.aspx or, oh, okay. So the question is, when you split by segments, does it keep the slashes in place? And the answer is it does. Let me see if we can see it yet. Ah, that's interesting. This behavior has changed. It used to keep the slashes in place. It looks like now with 4.1 it actually removes them. So you notice it puts a dot in between the rule of the name of the rule and the split value, but it takes the slashes out now. It used to leave them in. Apparently, with the 4.1 agents, this is a new behavior. So I'm trying to think, how can we keep the separators in there so that the words don't run together? Probably the best thing to do in this case might be to use a regular expression. And I'm not sure it's something I can do right here, right now, but with a little thought, we could probably work it out to put the slash back in there. There's a couple of different ways to do it. Another way might be to use a custom expression. I could do something like, let's see, get URL dot split so use segment 0 and 2 and ignore segment 1, something like that. And you notice I actually, when I create this, I put the slash back in there in between them. Again, regular expressions are tricky, custom expressions are tricky. It might take a few tries to get it right, but something like that would probably work for you. So someone said, could you rename it instead? Yeah, you could absolutely do that. Instead of adjusting the custom rule, I could come back to my list of BTs and select each of these and rename them, you know, to put the slashes back in, right, in the right places. The problem with that is you have to do it one at a time. And this particular rule only created 4 BTs. What if it creates 100? Then you're going through and renaming one after the other after the other. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I'm lazy. If I have to do something more than once or twice, I'm going to automate it so that I don't have to do anything manually. So for me, I would rather create a custom rule that does what I want rather than go through and manually rename or manually exclude the ones that don't match. Okay, but that's me. I'm lazy. Let's go down to the last question, new question from Daniel. Is the last part using regex documented somewhere? I believe so. There is a page in our documentation on using regular expressions in the custom match rules. You can use it on parameters or part of the payload. And regular expressions are a tricky thing for a lot of people. They're tough to understand, and once you've written them, they're tough to read. Unless you've spent years programming Perl, you're probably not that familiar with regular expressions. So there are a couple of sites that can actually help with this. And if you Google for regex tester, you'll find a bunch of example ones. Depending on what text editor you use or IDE you use, there may even be a feature built in there to test regular expressions. But so I often use a site like this to test out my regular expressions and see what results I'll get from the match groups before I try it as a custom rule. But feel free to use the documentation, play around with it a little bit. Eventually you'll get the hang of it. And if you're not sure, you can always open a support ticket and ask the guys for help. Most of you have probably used our support before, but these guys are outstanding and they will take the time to help you no matter how complicated your question is. Any other questions? What's the one from Nikolai there? Can you please provide some example how we can create a web service in a custom match rules? Okay. So all the examples I've done so far were servlet rules. They were matching web pages. The question is, can we do it for a web service too? The answer is, yeah, you can. The options are a little different, as you'd expect. You're not matching based on a URL. You're matching on things like the service name and the operation name. So you go back down to your custom match rules, same section as before. The only difference is you're going to select a different entry point type, and you're going to do a web service type. And now you see different options come up. Okay? So I could create a BT for, I don't know, maybe a shipping service, since this is a well, actually, that doesn't make sense. This isn't an e-commerce site. It's a movie streaming site. We don't ship anything. Never mind. I'll create a credit card payment service instead. Maybe my web service name is credit service, and the operation name that you're connecting to is called send payment, something like that. So that's how you can create a BT match rule. And again, you can use filters to sort of do wildcards and matching and regular expressions and things like that, so that you can match different service names. Any other questions? You're welcome, Nikolai. Again, guys, this is a big topic. I've just, I've shown you some of the possibilities, but this is where you have to go back and think about how your application works and how you might apply some of this to your own configuration, right? Everyone's always got crazy URLs that they need to clean up and match and make BTs out of. It gets back into that whole sort of iterative kind of process where you get an idea, you try it, maybe it doesn't quite work, you try it again, you create a closer match rule, and eventually you get it to where you want it. And then you have a very nice set of BTs that you can live with. At that point, you turn on the BT lockdown feature to keep it nice and clean. And every once in a while, you go into the all other traffic to see if there's anything new that should be promoted out to a BT. With the web server agent, will it work in a similar way? You know what? The web server agent is brand new, and I do not have an answer for that off the top of my head. I believe the match rules work the same way for the web server agent, but the discovery and lockdown features I don't believe will work with that yet. But after we end the webinar, I will try to find out and get an answer for you, Daniel. Okay, follow-up question from Daniel. What he's looking to do with the web server agent is instrument some, reverse proxy apps. And that's a common use of putting a web server in front of your app server, right, is to act as a reverse proxy, serve the static content, things like that. People use Apache or Nginx or Varnish or different things. So with the web server agent, I believe you can have custom match rules based on URL segments or match conditions, we'll just make sure for you. Anybody else? All right, if there are no more questions, I guess we'll call it a day. Thank you guys very much for attending. I hope this was useful and informational. If you have any follow-up questions, my email address, traydell@appdynamics.com. Feel free to shoot me an email, or like I said, you can always open a support ticket and ask those guys for help. All right, thanks very much.